Welcome in, everyone. Today we've got a truly fascinating explainer queued up for you. We're looking at the ultimate extreme makeover, but, not of the body. We're talking about a makeover of the soul. If you've ever wondered what it actually takes to completely erase the human ego, well, this historical text breaks it down step by step. We're examining the intensely internal spiritual progression of a mystic named Luisa Piccarreta. We're going to look strictly at what the source material describes regarding her absolutely rigorous path of self-denial and spiritual awakening. Okay, let's dive right into this.
So here's the roadmap for our explainer today as we track her spiritual ascent. We'll be covering 5 distinct phases: the awakening, detachment from the world, annihilating pride, mortifying the will, and finally, the ultimate tests.
Phase 1, the awakening. And it all kicks off with the Christmas novena.
Picture this. She's just 17 years old, and she decides to honor the 9 months Jesus spent in the womb by doing something pretty extraordinary for a teenager. She starts meditating for 9 hours every single day. I mean, just imagine the sheer discipline that requires. During these long, quiet hours, she'd intensely visualize heaven, the Trinity, the Incarnation, all while wrestling with her own deep feelings of unworthiness. This timeline right here perfectly illustrates her escalating devotion, which the text tells us culminated on Christmas Eve. While alone in her room, she reported this incredibly profound vision of Jesus as a baby. The text describes him as shivering, reaching out, wanting to be embraced. And even though the vision vanished the second she tried to hold him, this single moment completely ignited her spiritual fire.
Moving on to Phase 2, detachment from the world, also known in the text as purification from creatures.
Right around this point, the text introduces a really fascinating dual-voice narrative. Luisa begins receiving guidance from an interior voice, or a divine master. And notice the absolute, uncompromising demand of this voice. If you do not remove the little world that surrounds you, I cannot freely enter into your heart. It demands total detachment. The voice basically asked her to strip away all mundane distractions, worldly imaginations, earthly thoughts, the whole shebang. The goal here is to literally create a void, a completely empty space in her heart, solely for divine grace to occupy.
So, how do you actually apply this in real life? Well, the text outlines an extreme behavioral shift. She actively stopped engaging in normal everyday family chats simply because the interior voice warned her that small talk literally covered her heart in dust. Furthermore, imagine treating insults and mockery not as personal attacks, but as literal divine gifts for your own growth. She essentially rewired her psychology to view all people purely as images of God. If someone praised her, she dismissed it, knowing human opinion changes like the wind. But if they insulted her, she welcomed the chance to grow. It completely flips standard human behavior right on its head.
Which brings us to Phase 3, annihilating pride, or the ego's removal.
So, the crucial point is, once the external world was stripped away, the text introduces a concept that closely mirrors what we might today call ego death. It's called the annihilation of self. This is the absolute destruction of the ego and self-reliance. It's the practice of recognizing your own absolute nothingness so you can rely entirely on divine grace. The philosophical framework here is pretty stark. If a soul holds on to even a tiny shred of pride or takes credit for its good deeds, there is literally no room left for the divine to enter.
To really drive this home, the interior voice uses a striking metaphor. It tells her she must become like a baby in swaddling clothes. The imagery here is just radical, absolute vulnerability. Think about it. A swaddled infant can't move its feet to walk, can't raise its hands to work. It has to depend entirely on its mother for survival. And that is exactly how she was instructed to rely on her master's support, feeling utterly unable to take a single step or even breathe without divine assistance. It is an incredible, almost unfathomable level of surrender.
But achieving this state, it caused a massive internal conflict. Look at the stark contrast in these viewpoints here. Luisa was agonizing over her past sins, constantly feeling unworthy and just drowning in guilt. But the interior voice completely rebuked this. It taught a really radical idea. Feeling guilty and constantly dwelling on your past is actually a distraction. The voice explained that once sins are confessed and the soul is humbled, dwelling on the past is like choosing to stay rolled in the mud. It actively blocks your ascent. The focus had to shift entirely forward, strictly toward love.
Phase 4, mortifying the will. This is where it becomes a daily practice.
Now, this is where the text grounds all that high-level mysticism into incredibly mundane everyday reality.
The voice gives her a profound instruction. Like a coin not recognized by the people if it does not bear the image of the king, your works have no value if they are not grafted to my cross. She couldn't just do an ordinary action anymore. Every single movement, every single mundane daily routine had to bear the hallmark of self-denial.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Honestly, it's an intense checklist of avoiding comfort. Imagine sitting down to do some work but forcing yourself to balance on only half the chair, or walking outside and actively refusing to even glance at a beautiful flower, keeping your eyes strictly locked forward. When it came to meals, she would intentionally choose the least desirable food on the table, or sometimes she'd just leave her stomach entirely empty. Every single natural human urge for physical comfort was systematically denied, all to let her own will die.
And her obedience was tested in agonizing ways that went way beyond just physical comfort. The text details this deep, burning craving she had to receive communion. It literally kept her awake all night in eager anticipation. Yet, the very next morning, her priest, her spiritual director, strictly denied her the Eucharist without a single word of explanation. Talk about a crushing test of absolute obedience. She obeyed the priest, crying quietly in the church, until the interior voice finally spoke up within her, providing that spiritual comfort and presence she thought she had just lost.
Which brings us to our final phase, Phase 5, the ultimate tests, desiring suffering and loneliness.
As her journey reaches its absolute most extreme stage, the interior voice tells her, "I want you to enter the immense sea of my passion." The voice was inviting her to plunge into and meditate so deeply on divine suffering that her own earthly pains would feel like a mere shadow by comparison. By immersing herself in this immense sea, suffering wasn't just something to be tolerated anymore. It was something to be actively desired as a way to imitate her master.
And this desire truly peaked during what the text calls the balcony vision. Feeling completely overwhelmed by sadness one afternoon, she stepped out onto her balcony just to clear her head. But instead of seeing her normal street, she experienced a highly visceral vision of Jesus carrying the cross right through her neighborhood, surrounded by a violent crowd, looking up directly at her for help. This experience sparked an unquenchable thirst within her to suffer in secret, basically begging to take on the pain she witnessed in that vision.
So, what does this all mean? It brings us to a really critical question when we look at this text's spiritual framework. How is a soul tested once it actually achieves complete obedience? I mean, once a person has given up their ego, abandoned their comfort, and actively desires suffering, what is even left to test?
Well, the source material gives a pretty stark answer. By removing the feeling of grace entirely, the ultimate final test in this theology is the complete and total withdrawal of divine comfort.
The master delivers a genuinely chilling warning that he is going to step back. The interior voice says, "I will make you touch your nothingness with your own hands." He's leaving her in total, agonizing isolation. It's a test to see if her faith can survive when she feels absolutely nothing but an empty, silent void.
And the physical toll of this spiritual silence was brutal. We're talking bitter physical cold, intense trembling, and literally struggling to breathe for days on end. During these 2 to 4 day stretches of total spiritual silence, she would look at water or fire or flowers and just plead with nature for any sign of God. Stripped of all internal comfort, she had to rely entirely on blind faith. It's the ultimate psychological and spiritual endurance test, clinging solely to the Eucharist for survival until the voice finally, eventually returned.
And that leaves us with a profound question as we wrap up today's explainer. Does true, profound spiritual ascent inevitably require the total destruction of the self? Luisa Picaretta's journey is a jarring, fascinating look at the absolute limits of human devotion. What do you take away from a soul that strips away literally everything, even the comfort of grace itself, just to reach the divine? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.